Scarborough-Gilwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak. And I particularly want to thank the member from Wellington Halton Hills for tabling this motion. But I want to offer my thanks to that member with a caveat. So in this chamber, we pretty well say what we wish to say within the rules of parliamentary decorum. But it is ultimately the government and the government members that will have to deal with the fallout of any, if any, from this debate. This chamber is, however, an opportunity to reflect the deep anger of the people of Canada towards the Chinese Communist Party, the current government of China. There's no question that the arrogance and ignorance of the Chinese government expressed by its officials and so-called diplomats has inflamed the passions of Canadians. The most obvious point of contention is the hostage kidnapping of the Michaels by the government of China. The government of Canada is necessarily constrained while it deals with the reality of kidnapping. And I think that was the point that my honorable friend, the member from Winnipeg North, was trying to make, that there is a constraint that is imposed upon the Prime Minister when dealing with the government, with a government that kidnaps citizens of another country. Kidnapping works. It is the hallmark of terrorists, organized crime, rogue nations, and the Communist Party of China. It's contrary to the rules and values of any civilized nation, let alone the rule of law. Necessarily, the government of Canada has had to deal with the government of China as one would with terrorists or mafia thugs, and therefore this has relational consequences, as does this debate. No trade deal, convention, memorandum of understanding, or contract is worth the paper it's written on with this government. Any vulnerability will be exploited by the government of China, and there is no basis for any trust, for any undertakings, or any understandings. It's clear that the government of China has decided that it has no respect for any other nation, large or small. The goal is to have all nations as vassal states, including nations like Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain. Even Donald Trump was at least dimly aware of the threat to the United States. It didn't have to be that way, Madam Speaker. Going back to the historic Nixon visit, it was the intention of the family of nations to bring China out of its backward state by a series of favorable trade deals, the most significant of which was admission to the World Trade Organization. For years, China has regarded the laws and conventions and rules of the WTO as casual suggestions to be ditched when convenient. It appears that cheating pays. Widespread theft, one-sided trade admissibility, off-tariff blockage, and outright corruption have fueled China's spectacular rise in wealth, and the West has been slow to respond. Simultaneously, unanswered military aggression in the South China Sea with the creation of artificial islands and the intimidations of other nations' navies, particularly the Philippines and Vietnam, has further entrenched China's bully status. The use of its vast financial resources to buy or intimidate other nations is legendary. The government of Sri Lanka is completely at the mercy of China. Many African states are so compromised that their own people can't get either work or food in their own nation. And it's not just developing nations. Widespread theft of intellectual property by Chinese entities at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party occurs here on a daily basis. The Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, the CBC have all documented vast slave networks producing all kinds of goods, many of which infect Canada's supply chain. Recently, CBC's Marketplace ran a piece on slave labor in the making of PPP products that we use on a daily basis. You'll recollect, Madam Speaker, that we were desperate in the last few months for products such as that. The Globe and Mail recently reported about solar giant Canadian Solar and two mining companies that are in grave danger of having their supply chains tainted with slave labor. The Toronto Star wrote a devastating piece on shipments coming from foreign sources that the U.S. will not allow to be sold in their country, but allows the transshipment into another country, namely Canada. Canadian workers and companies cannot compete with slave labor. The practice is so widespread that consideration should be given to a change in the presumptive balance, the assumption being that any goods coming out of China have slave elements in it unless it is demonstrably shown to be otherwise. In the last Parliament, I introduced a bill called C-423, the Modern Slavery Act. That bill has been picked up in the Senate, and it's named S-216. And as its successor, it is making a painful way through the Senate. The government of Canada would be well advised to take it over. It works on the presumption that Canadians would not knowingly buy products made by slaves. Companies of a certain size would be required to certify to the Minister of Public Safety that they've examined their supply chains and are satisfied that no slavery exists in their supply chains. Wealth built on theft, intimidation, duplicity, and slavery is the hallmark of this Chinese government. It should therefore be no surprise that human rights, let alone moral integrity, are a foreign concept to this deeply corrupt government. We saw the human rights of the people of Hong Kong rolled up last summer despite the protests of millions and the treaty protection of the Sino-UK Treaty. Taiwan endures an ever-increasing series of aggressive military provocations, regardless of the democratic aspirations of the Taiwanese people. China regards these as quote-unquote internal matters, even though they are manifestly not internal matters. There are other international concerns: border skirmishes with India, occupation of Tibet, abuses of its own citizens, substantiated allegations of organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners, wanton destruction of Christian churches. Therefore, it should be of no surprise that when credible human rights organizations make credible allegations of extensive abuses of human rights of Uighurs and Turkic Muslims, including but not limited to torture, enslavement, restrictions of freedom of movement, denial of freedom of religion and belief, denial of the right to fair trial, etc. All the evidence points one way. All the state disinformation points the other way. The observations of any objective report point one way and one way only. Unfortunately, these are all the requisite elements of genocide taking place against the Uyghur and Turkic Muslims. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, I have to support this motion. I say unfortunately, Madam Speaker, because the labeling of genocide is a very serious business and the Prime Minister is right to be cautious. The government of China has no respect for the rights of other nations, no respect for the rights of other peoples, no respect for the rights of other citizens, of its own citizens, and certainly no respect for the rights of minority groups, and I dare say the government in China will have no respect for the passage of this motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for your time, your attention. I look forward to colleagues' questions.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Listen to the members. I've been listening to the speeches all day today and been taking notes. And I appreciate the members' comments on the amendment and the motion in front of the House. My question is this: in the members' opinion, what is the most effective measures that democracies could take in concert to put pressure on China to change? Is it Magnitsky sanctions on particular Chinese officials? Is it using trade sanctions? Is it other forms of pressure, such as diplomatic? Is it reform of multilateral institutions to better put in place mechanisms to better hold China accountable for its infractions in international law and of our international rules-based system? So I'm wondering what, in his opinion, would be the most effective tools available to democracies to effect change in China.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
I thank my friend for the question, and it is a thoughtful question. And my immediate response is all of the above. I believe, had something to do with the creation of Magnitsky sanctions in Canada, and I like what they do in terms of targeting the most egregious perpetrators of these kinds of human rights abuses. However, the limitation of the Magnitsky sanctions is that it is a pervasive government policy of the government of China to carry on as it does with both trade deals and et cetera. If there was a mechanism by which there were realistic trade sanctions that could be coordinated by trading nations that share the same values, I would be very supportive of that. Regrettably, Canada is a rather small player in a rather big pond, and unless and until we have pretty well everyone in place, our unilateral responses will be brushed off by the government of China, and possibly gross reactions which are counterproductive to the best interests of the people that we hope to help.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to congratulate our colleague. I was a bit on the fence listening to your speech, given the idea that China is running roughshod over human rights, and you gave lots of examples. And I was saying, that, how is this possible? But by the end of your speech, I was, and I still am, surprised, and kudos to you. The subcommittee on human rights was established and found that China had committed crimes against humanity with concentration camps, rapes, separating children from their families, slavery, enslavement, harassment of the Uyghurs, surveillance, mass sterilizations. These are things that are unbelievable in 2021. I'd ask my colleague whether he'd be in favor of endorsing the Bloc Québécois proposal to the effect that, as by way of reprisal to China, we should boycott the Beijing Games in 2022. The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And first of all, may I say, as a practicing parliamentarian of 23 years now, that I'm a big fan of committees. Sometimes they drive me crazy, but by and large, committees have the power to bring witnesses together in a manner that is extremely useful and helpful to guiding government policy. So I, whether it's a subcommittee or whether it's a full committee, and if they have opined on taking in evidence, then I would take that very seriously. On the Olympics issue, it is a bit of a sidebar issue to this particular debate. However, I would point out that the Olympics is largely an exercise in political symbolism, and I think that the political symbolism of withdrawal or shifting is something to be seriously looked at. I think that the motion is. I just want to stay with the motion that's before us today, but he does raise a valid point.